Good afternoon and welcome to the show. It's our Health and Living segment. Dr. Harjeet Singh, consultant orthopedic surgeon, in for his monthly show. Now, it's normal to feel sore and tired after a good workout, but at what point is it not normal to continuously feel tired? If not properly addressed, fatigue can affect an athlete's performance. So to find out how to spot the signs of fatigue, what you can do about it, and if supplements actually help, and Dr. Harjeet is going to help us answer some of those questions. How are you today, Dr. Harjeet?
I'm definitely not fatigued. It's been some time since I came on, so excited.
Liar, I can see you in your scrubs and, just walked out of the operating theatre, haven't you?
Yeah, I did that today.
Okay.
I tried to shorten it, speed up surgery, but we still do okay.
Okay. How is it going since it's been 1 year since the pandemic? How's your clinic doing, and how are people coming back to get themselves sorted out? People were shying away from hospitals before.
Yeah, I think people have come to accept to a certain extent that COVID-19 is here to stay for a period of time, and a foreseeable future is with the virus. And we've already had a year of creating our own SOPs to protect ourselves. So I guess it's a lifestyle change, and I deal with people who are unwell, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's only a certain amount of self-care and self-management that they can do, and sooner or later they do come in.
Okay. So let's talk about fatigue. How do you even define fatigue? I'm just thinking, we use it so loosely, isn't it? Fatigued from everything. But in the context of an athlete's performance, what does fatigue actually mean?
Actually, fatigue is it's a symptom but not a condition. Okay, it's a feeling of constant tiredness, which can be mental, physical, or both. Now, we will just come on and just say, I'm fatigued, saya penat lah, but it is the lessened capacity for work, reduced efficiency for accomplishment, and surprisingly, 20% of any group of people might have it at any one time. And additionally, most of fatigue is actually mental than physical. Up to about 80% is mental fatigue.
Wow.
Yeah, so there is this condition can be more in your mind than and it manifests in a very physical manner. So fatigue is, even in athletes, a lot of it is mental, although they have a higher chance of it being physical.
So what's happening to the body when fatigue sets in?
Now, if you look at the context of exercise, okay, physically, muscle fatigue usually happens with exercises that cause the muscle to contract in a concentric manner. That means the muscle is actually becoming shorter while it's working. And this actually burns a lot of fuel. So activities like cycling, swimming causes a lot of fatigue, and the person feels tired but not actually overtly sore. Now, if you look at soreness, on the other hand, that is the feeling that you get when you do weight training, running, where there is a cyclical lengthening of the muscle, and there's a lot of stretching of the fibers, and you after those kind of workout, you actually feel very sore at the muscles, and this may last over about 48 to 72 hours and goes away after time. So if you look at fatigue has everything to do with the fuel element of your activity. That means the amount that you can burn, the fuel that you can burn. So your hydration, nutrition, and rest is most important to prevent fatigue.
So what's a normal experience of physical fatigue then? If it's not soreness, then how do you make the differentiation between fatigue versus just soreness?
Okay, so if you look at muscle soreness, you actually feel it in isolated parts of the body which have been worked out. Now, say if you were running, then if you were running, you tend to feel it in your quadriceps, hamstrings, the lower part of your body, the lower back. But fatigue, it's actually a feeling of more like an exhaustive feeling. So you tend to feel that you're tired, you feel mentally that you can't continue a workout, and it so much so that it requires a period of rest for you to actually bring yourself back to some amount of activity. So the feeling is more global, and it's over the whole body.
So if you say 80% is usually mental fatigue, what leads to that?
Um, you see, when we exercise, we have to understand whether it's for competition or when we are recreational athletes, we tend to have goals and we build towards those goals. Okay, that means the load of exercise that we put on the body is increased over time. What we need to remember, it is not only about exercising, it is also about the rest, the hydration, the nutrition that we take. Now, when there is an element of over exercising with reduced amount of rest, we bring the circumstance where our body reacts predominantly through our nerves and endocrine system, the hormones, to sort of like increase the ability for the body to cope. That means our heart rate will increase, our resting heart rate will increase, our submaximal heart rate will increase a bit. Uh, we tend to have a perception of increased tiredness based on the workload that we normally do. Now, when done correctly, the rest and play cycle allows us to recover faster. Now, sometimes we slip into a situation that we exercise a bit too much, we are lax on the rest part of the whole cycle, and over time this develops into a situation of maladaptation and over exercising. Now that brings about fatigue.
And how would you know it's happening? Can you monitor fatigue levels?
Now unfortunately it's very, very subjective, right? So for higher level athletes, there is always a questionnaire for these kind of subjective symptoms, and over time there is also a measurement of their heart rate when they train. So in high level athletics, yes, you can pick it out, although most of the time it's so subjective that the line between exercising appropriately and fatigue is very, very thin. So that's where it comes that the suspicion of the problem has to be very, very strong for you to say that it's actually fatigue. Because there are medical conditions which mimic fatigue. So if you have iron deficiency anemia, if you have heart disease, uncontrolled diabetes, you can still feel the same way. You know, the symptoms include tiredness, altered sleep. That means after exercising, you have a lot of trouble with sleep, and your sleep wake cycle tends to get affected. You get poor performance for the amount of work that you're doing in. So there's no development in the amount of capability that you're putting and improvement in performance. So that's when we look at fatigue as a problem.
Do wearables help in any way? And if, since most of us wear them, can we use it to measure?
I think those of us who use the wearables constantly, we can always look at our resting heart rate as a baseline. That's one. And when we exercise, we normally are able to look at the zones in which we are exercising. And over time, the intensity of exercise that we do, we kind of know where our heart rate is supposed to be. Now, the more advanced wearables, okay, they allow us to actually look at the variability of the heart rate from beat to beat. But that's more academic and scientific. So high-level athletes tend to use that. The coaches can look at how the body responds to exercise, because that also is it's a factor based on the hormonal level of the athlete. And then over that, they can gauge what's going on. But it is very, very subjective.
Dr. Harjeet Singh, consultant orthopedic surgeon, on the line with me. We're discussing fending off fatigue, especially amongst athletes and people who are high performers in sports. When we come back, I want to find out, every one of us will have different fatigue levels. We would have a different, what determines low or high, a low or high threshold. And if you are fatigued, does that increase your risk of injury? Coming up next on The Bigger Picture, BFM 89.9. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Mira Sivasudi. On the line with me, Dr. Harjeet Singh, consultant orthopedic surgeon. We're discussing fatigue and how to fend off fatigue. I think you've said something interesting in the early part of this interview, Dr. Harjeet. Your definition of fatigue, first of all, it is a symptom. It is not a condition, and we need to remember that. And 80% of fatigue is mental fatigue. So that's interesting in the context of sports. 20% very much physical. You've spoken about how you can monitor fatigue levels when it comes to monitoring. We've all got wearables. You can probably look at your resting heart rate and your heart rate that you achieve normally. You roughly would know with exercise, right? And those could possibly give you some idea of whether or not you're going through fatigue. But ideally, if you don't, what would you say is the ultimate red flag, and you need to come in and see somebody about it?
I think the ultimate red flag for me is that while exercising, the perception of the intensity of the exercise is not like what you normally are able to do. And you notice that the enjoyment for the exercise is reduced. You tend to feel much more tired than you normally do with the same amount of exercise. You start becoming a little moody. Your sleep is altered. And all this actually points to the fact that the amount of exercise and the rest that you're getting after, the hydration that you're putting in and the nutrition that you're taking is not in tandem with the amount of work that you're going. So your rest-play cycle is going haywire, and these are the red flags that you can pick up.
Okay. So everyone's threshold for fatigue would be different, would you say?
Yeah, definitely.
So would some people have a higher threshold and some people a lower threshold?
No, I think when you build from a base and you are mindful that these conditions occur, and you're mindful the fact that when you exercise, you have goals towards your exercise, and this can only be achieved through a step up to your exercise. You understand that in exercise, adaptation and pushing the amount of exercise to improve is important, but you need to know that the food that you take, the amount of hydration that you consume, and most importantly, resting and recuperation from the exercise is important. Now, everyone would start predominantly at a lower base, and it depends on the intensity, and as you go on, you will build it up. So it is important, and you can build adaptation and increase performance in exercise. But if you overdo it, you definitely go into fatigue.
So that causes the fatigue. Overtraining, could fatigue be a sign of an underlying medical issue?
Definitely it can. Now, before you label someone as having overtrained and over-exercising, we are always mindful to make sure that he doesn't have any medical problems or as an underlying heart disease, low blood levels like anemia, and other problems that may cause these kind of conditions to manifest itself.
Okay. And why do you think it's important to know? Why is it important for an athlete to know that and monitor fatigue and to be aware that it's actually setting in?
Now, if a well-conditioned athlete pushes himself in training to a level of overtraining, his performance will drop, and he would reach a point where, forget about the performance dropping, he probably can't progress further. Now, when you have fatigue, the problems are not only physical, they are also psychological, chemical in the body, and it affects the equilibrium of the body. So, when you are an athlete and you're exercising and performing, your posture, your proprioception, that's the, reflex joint stability while you're moving, and joint positioning, everything gets affected. And what happens? Muscle strength, coordination, mental attentiveness to your activity is all compromised, and that brings about a situation that you can easily get injured. Yeah, because the fluid movements of exercise, your mental attention to it, the dynamic control while you are training is no longer there. And failure to recognize this prolongs the period of recovery that you need.
Okay.
So that is why most of the time we are mindful of overtraining. Although in athletics, even if you're mindful, you tend to push the boundaries. So there is a point that this can be detrimental to training.
So how do you manage fatigue when it sets in?
Now, unfortunately, the most important thing is to then rest and descale the amount of training that you do based on the level of fatigue that you have. Because ignored for a longer period of time, you can go into chronic fatigue, which even manifests with a depressive state, not only something simpler like a simple sleep rhythm disturbance. And you no longer have the drive to train, you no longer have the drive to compete, and sometimes bad enough that they may not be able to reach back to the levels that they were before.
That
So it's
bad,
not
huh?
just, yeah.
Especially when you say 80% is mental fatigue. I find that how difficult as to why physically you can't recover.
Now, the thing about the mental aspect of fatigue, it will affect your coordination, your want to train. Although push come to shove, you can still physically perform. But you have to understand that in higher level athletes and athletics and performance, it's always the mental game which is most important. Now, if you are not able to be mentally strong and perform, everything else crumbles. So I think that's the most important thing.
Do you think athletes or sports people actually take fatigue seriously?
I think the elite athletes definitely do. They are very mindful of their rest and play cycle, although the schedules tend to be very, very packed just before our pandemic. You can actually see that some athletes are performing very well, and then suddenly there's a sudden drop, and the whole season's over because they had overtrained or overperformed, and there were many competitions. And if you look at it, some of them actually have come out saying that, hey, I was in a place that I didn't want to go. I didn't like competing anymore. And that's a manifestation of fatigue in sports.
But do you think on the flip side, it benefits the athlete in some way as well?
I don't think if you overtrain, you actually benefit yourself. We do understand that in exercise training competition, adaptation to stresses of training is very, very important to take yourself to the next level. But that is only one part of it. Everything else, the psychology, the amount of science of nutrition that you put in, plays an equally important part for you to continue performing and improving. So it's not only pushing your physical and mental side which makes you a better athlete, is understanding that everything else is important.
What have you seen in your clinic, for an example, when it comes to fatigue? Is it related to injuries, and if it's psychological or it's mental? How do you help them through it?
Although we consider this a problem of more elite athletes who train very, very hard, I've had the unfortunate situation to treat a few recreational athletes who were pushing themselves hard, and they actually came in with a lot of niggly, repetitive problems because they were overtraining. So at the lower back, Achilles tendon, a lot of tendinitis. And when we got into the issue deeply, I noticed that there was a certain moodiness and non-enjoying of sports, which I've known them for a period of time, and they were just pushing themselves too hard. So when we actually put it forth that these conditions actually happen, and gave them some materials to read, and yes, they got away. They started understanding it. They then train, in an appropriate manner with a good rest cycle. They started interval training. That means they push themselves hard, but they also have certain times where they train other parts of their body, or they move away from training and do something else. So there was a shift, and the intensity was reduced, and they were okay after that.
And if you talk about mental fatigue, it could be also due to reasons not directly linked to the sport, would you say?
Definitely. We wouldn't be surprised that we shouldn't be surprised that athletes are also human.
Yeah.
So any relationship outside of sports will definitely affect them mentally,
And that indirectly affects them physically as well.
I wouldn't even say it's the sometimes the effect is so direct that you see it immediately. You have a trouble with your girlfriend and it comes into training. So that is why you have a good coach, good relationship with your coach, you tend to be able to navigate through these kind of things.
Okay. Supplements, caffeine-filled energy drinks are often used by athletes, but how do these supplements affect the body and the individual's experience of fatigue?
Yeah, that's a difficult one to answer. Okay, the way I look at it is that everyone has to understand that basic dietary needs are basic dietary needs. You cannot rely on supplements if your diet is not right. You cannot rely on supplements if most of the time you eat junk food in order for you to perform, exercise, and enjoy it. Now, naturally, we always say that natural, unprocessed food is the best thing that you can take. But when you are exercising, it is difficult to have natural food because a lot of people develop bloating and the volume is not actually enough for you to use if the exercise is intense. Now, if you look at the kind of supplements, the common ones we have are the energy replacement, which we take, the power gels or something while, and these actually most of the time contain easily absorbed carbohydrates, and they're very useful for moderate and intense workouts for the shorter period of time. Now, a lot of us also have a lot of fluid replacement, which replace electrolytes. Sodium increases thirst, a bit of sugar to increase absorption. So that's another group of, but the most interesting one that everybody often wants to know about is the one where it's used for strength, is used for, when you're doing power weight work. A lot of them are off-label. Some of them are known to help, like creatine is one of them. Taken appropriately, we now know that it increases the substrate for adenotriphosphate, and everything that we do to give a bit more explosive power. And this allows people who do weight work to build the muscle better. That's one. Now, a lot of us, after exercising, we go for our recovery kind of drinks. These contain protein, help a bit of muscle repair, and taken judiciously with appropriate diets, I think they are very, very good. I get asked a lot about the nutritional supplements that people can take. Conventionally, I used to say that if you take a balanced diet, you don't need any other zinc or magnesium. But I find that the modern diets are sometimes unable to cope with that, and so we are fine with those kind of supplements too. But the takeaway from all this is that I think that you have to get your diet done right. You have to get your hydration done right. All this does not work effectively or appropriately if your basics are not right. So if you eat poorly, these are not going to help you for the long period of time.
And some mistakes that people use or people make as a result that leads to fatigue in athletes. So a caffeine crash, for an example, all of that is very, so caffeine is very temporary, isn't it?
Yes.
But does that even help when you're going through fatigue?
I don't think it will help in fatigue.
Or does it
I think
mimic? I mean, sorry, does it
mask.
mask
Yeah,
fatigue? Yeah.
yeah. I don't think it will mask it for long periods of time. Now, if I am doing intense exercise or maybe some longer endurance runs, and I feel that I am going to bonk. Basically, I am totally down out. I take a power gel. I might get a bit of juice to continue on. A lot of them, apart from the carbo that, the easily processed carbo that it has, some of them juice you up with a bit of caffeine, but a lot of it is temporary. Now, if you had hydrated well throughout your activity, then you won't reach that point. If you had pre-hydrate and also loaded yourself before the exercise, you are unlikely to come to that point. So I think understanding the basis of exercise and nutrition is very, very important, and it's not difficult to understand.
Okay. So if we can prevent fatigue from setting in at all, how would we do that?
I think you have to understand progression and adaptation to increasing exercise as a science and not just something that you can push yourself through. Um, Getting yourself hydrated, appropriate diet, having very, very achievable goals, and building from that is the way that you continue enjoying exercise and progressing forward. Now, this is very different in elite athletes. The push that they give themselves is much more than we do, but the concepts are almost the same.
Would you have a message for us?
I think fatigue is not just penat lah. In exercise and sport, it means much, much more. It is not only a problem of the elite and high-performing athlete, it's also problems that we see in recreational and younger athletes who push themselves to achieve much, much more. And I think prevention is definitely better than cure, because the time away from exercise and sport, if you overtrain, resulting in fatigue and also additional mental fatigue, is a long period of time. The recovery often is incomplete. So I think it's better to just prevent it.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Dr. Harjeet Singh, consultant orthopedic surgeon, speaking to us about fending off fatigue on Health and Living on the Bigger Picture, BFM 89.9.